Hey guys, welcome to Telling the Told and Untold. My name is Tshego. I know I've been gone for a while, but I'm back now. So for today's case, we're going all the way to a small village in Matuluma on the south coast of KwaZulu-Natal. On the 28th of February 2003, two friends, 21-year-old Yaku Stras, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, and 18-year-old Wesley Julyan set out for a night of partying. So basically they would just hop from bar to bar, go to different pubs, and they were just having a nice time. They were drinking. It's alleged that they did ecstasy that night as well, and also weed. And yeah, they were just having a good time, and a little bit after 12 they decided that they wanted to go home, and that's when they discovered that their car had broken down. So they then decided to go to a nearby garage just to see if they could find someone who can help them. At the petrol station they met up with a 51-year-old man, Kennth Aardt. Kenneth had went to the petrol station just because he wanted to just buy a few things from the convenience store, nothing much, when he was approached by Yaku as well as Wesley. So they went up to him and basically they just asked him for a lift, and he agreed. He didn't see anything wrong with it. It was just these two young men, and he seemingly seemed like he wanted to help them. So after that they got into his car, and it's alleged that on their way to Wesley's home, because that's where they were going, Kenneth just decided that, you know what, let's go out for a few more drinks. So they decided to go to the social club, which was nearby. So they arrived at the social club a little bit after 1 a.m. and they had a couple of drinks, and they left at around 2:30 in the morning, so about an hour and a half later. And apparently Kenneth was really intoxicated. He drank a lot that night, so I think amongst themselves they just decided that Yaku would be the one to drive the car. I forgot to mention that Kenneth drove a Ford Icon. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. So once they got to the car, Yaku decided to sit in the front seat so he could drive, because he wasn't as intoxicated at all. I'm assuming he was intoxicated because he had been drinking the whole night, but less intoxicated than Kenneth apparently. And Kenneth sat in the passenger seat of his own car for some unknown reason, and Wesley sat directly behind Kenneth. So after this they set out to Wesley's home. So Wesley lived in a house with his mom and dad, and they lived basically on like an open plot that was surrounded by lots of like trees, greenery, like bushes, that type of thing, and that's where they were headed. So I don't know what was the plan, like how they would drive themselves to Wesley's home and then Kenneth would drive himself back. Yeah, I don't know what their plan was, but that's what they decided to do. So the following story is according to Yaku. Yaku says they were driving on the N2 highway near Park Rainy, and all of a sudden Wesley decided to strangle Kenneth. So he took his arm like in front of Kenneth and then like held him like in a chokehold type thing. And Yaku says that he was just very confused, and that's where he just started slowing down the car until he eventually stopped the car. And that's when he got out of the car and he just started pacing behind it because he was confused, like he didn't know what was going on, he didn't understand what was happening. And that's when Wesley just screamed out to him, "Pass me your shoelace, like I can't strangle him that well, so I need to strangle him like with something better, like something that can actually strangle him besides his like arm." So Yaku says like he really wasn't thinking, so he was just confused and was just doing what he was told to do. So that's where he just bent down and just took off the shoelace from his shoe and handed it to Wesley, and then Wesley proceeded to strangle Kenneth until Kenneth eventually died. So after this, apparently Wesley asked Yaku to check Kenneth's pulse, and he went to go check and realized that there wasn't any pulse. And that's when he sort of came back to reality and asked Wesley like, "Do you realize what you've done?" And Wesley just replied, "So what?" After this, they continued their way to Wesley's home, and they decided that they would dispose of Kenneth's body near the plot, because I did say they lived on like an open plot that was just surrounded like with greenery and things like that. I don't know like when they were driving to Wesley's home if they changed like the seating, because Yaku was driving, so I don't know if like Wesley went to the front seat and they put Kenneth in the back seat, or like they just stayed how they were before Wesley decided to strangle Kenneth, which is a bit weird if he was still in the front seat. So once Yaku and Wesley got to Wesley's home, they decided to take Kenneth out of the car and they went to an area on the land that wasn't directly like on the land of Wesley's home, but it was pretty close to it, and that's where they decided to dispose of the body. Wesley then went inside his parents' home and came out with packaging tape, and he put this tape around Kenneth's nose and mouth. I think that's just to like make sure that he actually is dead, and if he's not, then he'd probably just suffocate because he wouldn't have any air. After this, they just put him on the open land, and they just decided to put like a few like leaves and shrub over him, and then they proceeded to Durban, which was about 90 kilometers away from Wesley's home, to try and sell Kenneth's car. And they weren't able to sell the car, so they came back around 6 a.m. and after this they slept for a little bit, and when they woke up they tried to sell Kenneth's car for a second time, and that was also unsuccessful until they finally decided to abandon the car in Scottsburg. Yeah. Also, before they decided to abandon the car, they wiped down all the like fingerprints and anything that could basically link them to the car. So after they got rid of the car, they returned to the body, and then they decided that they wanted to bury it instead of leaving it like open on the land, just to avoid the smell of decomposition. So after this, they dug a shallow grave, and that's when they just kind of rolled Kenneth's body into it. And they said, according to Yaku, as soon as they rolled Kenneth's body into the grave, 70 rand fell out of his pocket, and that's where Wesley went to it, and then he took 50 rand for himself and gave Yaku 20 rand. 70 rand. Kenneth's wife, Sharon, reported him missing that very day on the 1st of March after he failed to return home. And unfortunately, she wouldn't hear anything about her husband or find out what happened to him until 60 days later, which was about almost just over 2 months. So for those 60 days, it appears as though Wesley was enjoying his life, like him murdering Kenneth or allegedly having murdered Kenneth really didn't affect him much. Like, he was just going on with his life like it didn't happen at all, whereas Yaku was really affected by this. He was affected by everything that had happened. So basically, Yaku had a friend in the UK, and his friend's wife was coming down to South Africa just to spend a couple of weeks here for some holiday, and she wasn't coming with her husband. So when she came down to South Africa, her and Yaku would meet up, and they had an affair. And after she returned home to the UK, they still continued messaging each other via text, and after the death of Kenneth, from the 1st of March to the 3rd of March, Yaku would continuously send this woman messages. In these messages, Yaku would basically just tell her that, you know, he feels so guilty, and if I can find some of the messages, I'll attach them. But if I can't, I know there's one message that said it was terrible burying this guy. He was ice cold and so white. They're going to be looking for him now. I'm so scared. Apparently the messages were really detailed and just very disturbing, and eventually this woman just decided to go to the UK police station and just tell them about the messages that Yaku had been sending her. After this, they decided to contact South African police, who contacted Interpol, and then eventually they were able to find Yaku, and that's how the case was basically solved and how they were also able to locate Kenneth's body. Yaku entered a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Wesley, and Wesley was arrested shortly afterwards. Wesley's story is completely different to that of Yaku's. He says that he was just following every word that Yaku said to him, and he was just following instructions. He says whilst they were in the car and Yaku was driving, Yaku just asked him, do you want to make a quick 10,000 rand? And all he did was listen to him. Wesley claims that all he had done was restrain Kenneth, while Yaku took off his own shoelace and strangled Kenneth on his own accord. Wesley also claims that Yaku is the one that told him to wrap Kenneth's face with packaging tape because he didn't want to see his face. And he also claims that once they were done burying Kenneth, Yaku told them to basically just stomp on the ground so that it would look as though the land hadn't been disturbed. He says after they buried Kenneth, he told Yaku that, we can't just leave this man here, like, we need to do something, let's just pray for him. Pray for him, the man that they just killed for some reason. And afterwards, they were basically just going back and forth between one another, trying to figure out who's going to pray, what they're going to say, until Yaku just said, "Dear God, please forgive us, may he rest in peace." The case became well known in the UK as the SMS murder, whereas in South Africa, Wesley was known as the Shoelace killer. In 2004, due to his plea deal, Yaku Strauss was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Wesley Julyan was found guilty, but mitigating evidence presented by his defense counsel regarding psychological assessment was accepted by the judge, and he was sentenced to just 13 years in prison. During his court-ordered psychological assessment, Wesley was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. However, the psychologist said that although he had been diagnosed with this, he basically knew what he was doing and he could be held accountable for his actions. Kenneth's family were outraged by the sentence. Wesley, only having received 13 years, they were just very upset, and they tried to argue against this. And after this, Wesley's sentence was increased to 20 years in prison. And they were very excited about this. They were happy. They thought that, okay, 20 years, it's not that long, but it's better than 13 years. And unfortunately, this happiness would die down because 5 years later, Wesley was released on parole. 5 years later. And the following year, Yaku was also released on parole. So basically, Wesley spent 5 years in prison for strangling a man, and Yaku spent 6 years in prison for being an accomplice to someone's murder. Yeah. The year after Yaku was released from prison, he claimed to have given his life to the Lord and religion, and after this, it appears as though he just went on to have a normal life. There's not much information about him after this. And Wesley just also went on to have a normal life as well. There's not much information about the life that he had after this. But yeah, that's what they went on to do, and there's no evidence to suggest that they ever got into contact after they both were released from prison. So for 8 years after Wesley was released from prison, he seemed to have a normal life. There's photos of him online with his 2 siblings, his sister Jodie, as well as his brother Jeffrey. The 3 unfortunately lost their mother during these 8 years, and after this, their father decided to move to Plettenberg Bay, and leave the family house that they had in Matalume. Yeah. So the 3 siblings went on to just live their lives, and Wesley's older brother Jeffrey got married to his longtime girlfriend Leanne McKenna, and things seemed to be going pretty well. The siblings would alternate between them living in the family home and them also just living their own lives in their different homes and just building their own families. The family house that they lived in Matlume remained within the family. It's the same property where Kenneth's body was buried near. And in 2017, Wesley's father decided that he wanted to sell the house, probably just because his kids are all grown up, his wife passed away, he moved away, so there was really no need for the house to be staying within the family, So Wesley's older brother was living somewhere else with his 9-year-old son Ethan, his 16-year-old stepdaughter Kayla, and his father-in-law Peter, alongside his wife Leanne. Wesley was staying at the Matlume property while the sale was in progress, and it's alleged that on the 19th of December 2017, Wesley noticed that there was some furniture missing from the house. So obviously all the siblings had been moving in the house and moving out of the house, so he saw furniture was missing, and that's when he decided to call Jeffrey. He was upset, why is there missing furniture? And just basically called him, and they just fought on the phone, and Jeffrey finally agreed to just come over the house. I think maybe to discuss it in person or to bring back the furniture, or both. So because it was December, the children were on school holidays, so Jeffrey decided to bring them along, as well as his father-in-law. He was supposed to pick up his wife from work at around 4:45 that day. So when Jeffrey failed to pick up his wife Leanne at 4:45 that day, she just knew that something was wrong. She tried to call him and he didn't answer, which she thought was strange because, number one, he always answers his phone, he's always on time, and it was just a bit strange. After this, she tried to call her daughter Kayla, and she too didn't answer. Then she called her father, and he also didn't answer, and she just knew something wasn't right. Like, why are all three of them not answering their phones? Eventually, she did manage to get home, and once she got home, she just walked into an empty house. Like, no one was there. Her son, her husband, her daughter, her father-in-law. And about 2 hours later, she received a terrifying phone call. She received a phone call that the family home was on fire. Neighbors had seen the house on fire at around 7 p.m. that evening, and they tried by all means to just stop this fire, but they were unsuccessful. And eventually, when firefighters got there and they managed to stop the fire, they found 4 bodies in the bedroom. Despite having found 4 bodies in the bedroom, they were pretty relieved to have found another person standing outside of the house. It was Wesley. Wesley was coughing profusely, and it appeared as though he had been in the house, but he just got engulfed by the flames and the smoke, and that's why he basically just ran out of the house, and he was coughing so much. Leanne was initially told that her family was asleep in the bedroom when the fire started, and to her this didn't make sense. Her family didn't live in that household. Also, why would all of them be asleep in one bedroom, like at the same time that they were supposed to come pick her up from work? Like, to her, it just didn't make sense. As investigators started to gather more information from Leanne about the fire, shocking details emerged from the bodies. Leanne did indeed lose her entire family. She lost her husband, Jeffrey, she lost her son, Ethan, she lost her daughter, Kayla, and she lost her father, Peter. But they hadn't passed away from the fire or from the smoke or from like smoke inhalation. They had in fact all been strangled to death. And after finding this out, it didn't take long for police officers to paint a better picture of the scene. According to the neighbors, once they got to the house, Wesley just was acting a bit strange. He wasn't acting normal. When they would ask him like if there's anyone in the house, he would be very vague in his answers. Like, he wouldn't reply yes, like there's 4 people in the house. He just like brushed them off and wouldn't give them a straight answer. And he also didn't try help them stop the fire. He was just like coughing and like watching them work tirelessly to stop this fire. Wesley had been taken to the hospital to be treated for smoke inhalation, and he was released the following day into police custody so that they could question him and just interrogate him about the fire and the events that occurred leading up to that. He denied having known anything like leading up to his family's death, and he says that once he arrived home, he saw the house was on fire and he ran inside just to try and help them, but there was just so much smoke that he couldn't handle it, so he ran outside, and that's why when firefighters found him, he was coughing a lot. Police officers asked him why he didn't call any emergency services after he got outside, or like once he saw the fire, and he says that by the time that he went outside, he realized that his neighbors had already called them, so he didn't see a need. Wesley said that he had no idea that his family was in the house and that they had all died until he was told whilst he was in hospital, and he also denied allegations of him trying to stop the neighbors from putting out the fire. Wesley was then released, and the funeral was held on the 28th of December. The investigation continued, and Wesley's phone records were seized, and they told a completely different story to what he said. He claimed that he left the house, and when he returned, he found the house ablaze, but in fact, his cell phone records show that he was at the house from the moment that his brother came over with the rest of his family. So that didn't make sense if he claimed that he wasn't at home when the fire started, when his cell phone records show that he was at home from like early in the afternoon until like later, even after the house had been set alight, he was home. His cell phone records also show by the time that he states that he was like overcome with smoke and like couldn't breathe and was coughing a lot. He sent his girlfriend, who was in America at this time, a message telling her that the house was on fire, which also doesn't make sense if like you're able to like send your girlfriend a message telling her that the house is on fire but you're unable to call emergency services, or the story that she told police officers made it seem as though like you were unable to do these things. If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. So from the investigation, it appears as though Jeffrey was killed first. He had been hit in the head with a pickaxe and then strangled to death with a rope. His father-in-law, 73-year-old Peter McKenna, had been strangled with a copper wire, and the children had been killed last. 16-year-old Kayla McKenna had been strangled with a dog collar and some green rope, while her brother, 9-year-old Ethan, had been strangled with an unidentified ligature. They had all been killed in different areas of the house and then dragged into the bedroom where they had been found, creating the initial misconception that they had died whilst they were asleep. It also appears as though the men were killed first, almost as though like you kill the strongest person and then kill the weaker people, like people that are easier to kill and are like easy to handle. I hope that makes sense. So it appeared as though Wesley first killed his brother Jeffrey, maybe in a struggle, and after that he realized that there was no turning back and he had to kill everyone else, almost as though to maybe leave no witnesses, or maybe he just had his own reasons for that. Reasons unknown to us. Wesley Julyan was arrested just days before his 33rd birthday and was charged with 4 counts of murder. Police believe the so-called Shoelace killer, who had been so infamous in his teens after killing Kenneth Aardt, had struck again, this time in his own home. Throughout his trial, Wesley just appeared drowsy and could barely communicate with the magistrate. He also applied for legal aid. The state's case against Wesley was purely circumstantial. They had no physical evidence against him, and they also didn't have any eyewitnesses that saw him like killing the family or him setting the house on fire. But circumstantial evidence is still evidence. So the prosecutors believe that Wesley had been fighting with Jeffrey over the furniture for quite some time now, and Wesley had felt as though Jeffrey had removed the items from the family home without his consent, which for him wasn't right because he was the one living in the house at that time. So anything that had to be like anything that was removed from the house, someone should ask him for it, like someone should ask permission from him and not just take it assuming that they can. So that's basically what the fight was about. Also, Wesley and his girlfriend had planned to like move in together at the time, and it's also believed that his girlfriend was maybe like pressurizing him, telling him to like get the furniture back, and he was just like fed up and just tired of hearing that he must get the furniture back and just wanted to get the furniture back. So it's believed that Wesley and Jeffrey argued on the phone over the furniture, and once Jeffrey got to the family home, their fight continued until Wesley just got really upset and picked up a pickaxe and hit Jeffrey over the head with it. And then that just had a domino effect and led to him killing the 3 other people that were in the house. During the trial, when Wesley was asked questions, he wouldn't like give a direct answer. Like he would answer the question like with an answer and basically just be like, does that make sense to you? Like, how could that happen? Kind of thing. Like very cocky. Like he would also smile sometimes, and it's like he didn't notice, like he just didn't realize the severity of everything that was happening, or he just didn't care, because why are you smiling during the trial of your brother and his family's murders? Like it just didn't make sense to most people, and that also just made him a little bit more suspicious. The state presented evidence that Jeffrey's company car keys were found in Wesley's car, which also didn't make sense because Wesley said, number one, he didn't know the family was there, and how could that be if you have your brother's car keys in your car? You know, it just didn't make sense. And that also just showed that they did have an interaction and he did know that the family was there. In February 2009, Wesley Julyan was found guilty of the murders and he was sentenced to 4 life sentences plus an additional 5 years for the arson. And that is it for today's case. If you guys have any comments, please leave them down below and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!